Welcome to the program. So these tariff tensions have fueled some $5 trillion in market sell-off in just the past 6 weeks alone. And we should note that President Trump, through his actions, has lifted America's effective tariff rate to about 8% from 2%, where it was last year. That's the highest it has been in the United States since World War II. So I'm curious, what are you gearing up for once Liberation Day or Wednesday comes into play?
It's a very good question, because the signaling or the lack of signaling coming from the White House really has businesses and heads of state on the back foot. Nobody knows what to expect. Will they be blanket tariffs? Will there be carve-outs? And at this point, I feel it's really important to put into context for your viewers that this is another example of geopolitics. The decision how and whether to use tariffs is one instrument of economic statecraft, and it's one that nobody really expected to see coming from the United States at this level, given that it has been the United States that constructed the global system in the first place.
And it was President Trump that rewrote NAFTA to USMCA during his first term. I think many people had been on board, and we should note that President Biden did keep some of the tariffs, specifically as it related to China, in place. I think many would have been on board if there had been more targeted precision tariffs directed at countries like China. But the fact that this seems to be willy-nilly across the board without any rhyme or reason or expectations about what comes next. I mean, President Trump was asked about details, and over the weekend, here's what he said.
The tariffs will be far more generous than those countries were to us, meaning they will be kinder than those countries were to the United States of America over the decades. They have ripped us off like no country's ever been ripped off in history. And we're going to be much nicer than they were to us, but it's substantial money for the country.
And by the way, these are tariffs that we're expecting to be on friend and foe across numerous countries. What do you mean? What do you think he means, first of all, when he describes these tariffs as kinder and more generous?
Well, we know that President Trump really believes that the rest of the world has been ripping off America. I think most orthodox economists see it somewhat differently, but getting back to how to interpret what might come next, here's where the signals are really muddy and why we are seeing a sell-off in the markets. And when it comes to thinking about everything from the outlook for, U.S. equities versus European equities, or interest rates, or consumer sentiment, for the first time really in our lifetimes, it's coming back to geopolitics and to power projection from the White House. It's not just the what, in other words, what will be announced from the White House, but why? Is it for national security, which is often a pretext for tariffs? Is it for revenue generation, which seemed to be what President Trump was saying in the clip that you just played? There is a real bewilderment around the world and with the U.S. companies that we talk to for how to make sense of it, but it's also leaving out the risk of retaliation. And I feel like that is underestimated and somewhat underpriced.
On that point of retaliation, and I should note, this is Chinese state media that is reporting this, so take it with a grain of salt. But there had been reports that Japan, South Korea are seeking to import semiconductor raw materials from China as sort of a new trading alliance, for lack of a better phrase, in response to these tariffs from the United States, as you noted, retaliatory tariffs. Again, this is coming from China's state media, who may be wanting to take advantage of this. But the fact that these, the possibility of these types of new partnerships being created suggests what to you?
Well, we've known for some time that the global order was fragmenting. What we're now seeing appears to be the United States kind of abdicating, removing itself from the rules-based order. And inevitably, in that nature abhors a vacuum, other groupings and other alliances are likely to coalesce, whether that's in Asia. We've seen, for example, European Union sentiment increase. We also see things like consumer boycotts, anti-US consumer boycotts in Canada and elsewhere. So the unintended consequences emerging from the changes in US policy have the possibility of eclipsing, to some extent, what the president hopes the tariffs will accomplish for the US economy.
Trump has long been enamored by tariffs, viewing them as an effective economic tool in terms of the money that he says it's going to bring in. Peter Navarro today said that some $6 trillion of revenue will be coming in as a result of these tariffs over the course of 10 years. Are tariffs a historically proven effective way to raise revenue?
Well, you're asking a geopolitical strategist, but the last time we used tariffs at this scale, famously was Smoot-Hawley, which was followed by the Great Depression. So there is a kind of a romanticism in this administration with that late 19th century, early 20th century period. President Trump talks about it a lot, about his affection for President McKinley. There are references to the Monroe Doctrine, and Manifest Destiny, that take us back to this period, which the president really lionizes as perhaps being the peak of U.S. power in relative terms before the wars. I do think most of us in the policy world get concerned that turning back the clock is the right thing to do when faced with more competition.
When you look at the polling and the president's approval rating, which at this point it's surprising given where his focus was on the stock market and the economy in his first term. He says he doesn't seem to care about a short-term market sell-off. He says in the long run this will all benefit Americans. But according to the newest polling, Gallup poll, 41% of Americans approve of his handling of the economy, 59% disapprove. And you talk to economists about who will be most impacted by these tariffs, and it is those who are the lower income earners in this country by a significant margin. And there's also the question about what this does for our global partnerships and relationships, specifically with allies. It seems to be rather difficult to separate a trade war from other relationships and other alliances, whether it's sharing intel information, whether it's collaborating on other projects. Perhaps I'm wrong, but can you walk us through, have we been in a situation like this before?
I think that we are in the midst of an unprecedented in modern times political experiment. The voluntary dismantling of alliances, which do span trade and security relationships, right? That's what it means to have alliances. They tend to be comprehensive. The whole notion of national interests and even values, although, that has a history of kind of waxing and waning over time. So how does the U.S. define its national interests and its values? It's a source of confusion. Being here in Europe as I am, as well as what appear to be the kind of extraterritoriality sorts of moves, whether that's insisting that companies not have DE&I policies on their books, or that the U.S. needs to have Greenland. It's this confusion about what the U.S. stands for and what the rules are. And if we really want to kind of bring it home, it's what are the rules of the game and who is prepared to observe them and enforce them.
And all this